Uh, Dear all, thanks for joining us today. Today we'll welcome Dr. Rajendran, an assistant professor and uh, the Sexton at the Sexton Chair in Reinforcement Learning in the Faculty of Computer Science at Dalhousie University. His research interests lie in building AI systems that, through interaction, can learn to be competent in complex, dynamic, and uncertain environments. He is interested in computational methods that build systems that build such systems as well as their practical applications and societal implications. His current research primarily focuses on deep reinforcement learning. Prior to his current position, he was an Evado postdoc fellow at Miller, Quebec AI Institute, and at the University of Montreal, working with Professor Sarat Chandra and Professor Diana Prika. He completed his PhD at University of Michigan Ann Arbor under the supervision of Professor Satinder Singh, and his master's and undergraduate degrees at IIT Madras under the supervision of Professor Balraman Ravindran and Professor Kaushik Mitra. Janarthanan's uh, research in machine learning has been published in top venues such as NeurIPS, ICLR, ICM. Uh, Professor Janarthanan, uh, the floor is all yours. We can get started.
Okay, thanks for the invite and thanks for having me, and thanks for the kind introduction, Rahul. Can everybody hear me well? Can you guys hear me? Okay. Okay, thanks. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask at any time, but I'm also going to pause in between the talk at different times for questions. Feel free to raise your hand or even speak up directly as long as the organizers are okay with it. Okay. Yeah. So this talk, I'm going to talk about two directions of research. So they're not necessarily the most recent among the works that I have done and published, but they are the ones that I'm most excited about currently, and also the ones that we are working on currently. So I'm going to talk about them. So before I get into those, I want to just give a brief introduction to the reinforcement learning problem for those who may not be familiar. And I'm also told this video might be made, a video recording might be made available online. So for the benefit of those who might watch it later as well. So I'll give a brief introduction to the RL problem and then jump into these two research projects. So here is a video of my friend Mac, who's trying to pick up his ball with his cone on. He had a surgery, so he had to wear this cone. Initially, he struggles quite a bit. So you guys see the video playing, right? I just want to make sure. I think so. Okay. So he initially struggles quite a bit, but then with interactions with his environment, he's able to pick up the ball even with his cone on. And in fact, with more interactions with his environment, he actually learns to pick up the ball faster with the cone than without the cone by actually scooping the ball with the cone. So significant portion of learning in animals, including in humans, happens through interactions. Through interactions, we learn the consequences of our actions and can then learn to act in order to achieve our goals. So reinforcement learning is a branch of machine learning, and as a branch of machine learning, provides a computational framework for learning from interactions. In reinforcement learning problem, as an agent that interacts with its environment, the agent typically observes the state of its environment and can then take actions in order to influence the state of its environment to move towards states that are desirable for the agent in achieving its goals. And in reinforcement learning, the desirability of a state is often expressed through these reward signal that the agent gets from its environment. So really the goal of the agent is to learn a policy A policy is nothing but a function that maps state or observation history to actions. So the goal is to learn this function or policy or how to behave given in a particular state or observations of the state, and to take action such that it maximizes the long-term reward that it receives. So here's a video of a robot that is learning to walk using reinforcement learning. So for this robot, I think this is a nice work called Daydreamer. I think this is from folks at UCB. Um, so here the robot observes the different sensor readings from the different parts of its body and actions it can take, the different joint movements, and it gets reward for standing upright and moving forward. And as you can see, with more and more interaction, it's able to learn how to first stand up and then slowly move forward in this environment. The key aspect to note here is that this agent is not told what actions to take, but instead it must discover which actions lead to higher rewards through trial and error. This is an example of learning from interactions, not in animals, but in machines. The applications of reinforcement learning are diverse in a lot of fields. And typically, you would imagine problems where examples of good behavior are either difficult, impossible, or just expensive to get to be potentially modeled as a reinforcement learning problem. So robotics is one example that I gave. Reinforcement learning is explored to build agents that can play games with us, play against us, and a lot of potential applications in industrial process control. For example, controlling components of a water treatment plant. You might want to make decisions such as how much chemicals to add, what should be the mixing speed, when to clean the filter, how long to clean the filter, and so on. So how do you make these control decisions such that you meet the target amount of water treatment while minimizing the energy use or cost, and so on. Also popularly in the recent years, dialogue systems such as ChatGPT and DeepSeek use reinforcement learning for parts of their training. And also a lot of potential applications in healthcare, things like resource management, precision drug dosing, and even in drug discovery, and also business management, just to give you an example. So this is just a very brief introduction to the reinforcement learning problem. So any questions for anybody who's not familiar, just at a high level, what is the reinforcement learning problem? Okay, so the first section of the talk, I'm going to talk about this idea of adapting to local environment changes. This part of the talk is based on these three works. I'm going to mainly talk about the third work and provide some information from the first two relating to the third work, but these are directly related works. So there are several tasks in the real world where it's meaningful to model them as reinforcement learning problems, where we could have abrupt sudden changes in the environment because of unknown or not directly perceivable reasons. For example, imagine an application where you want to control the traffic signals, in a particular part of the city, a lot of traffic signals in a particular part of the city. And maybe the traffic inflow rates of some intersections may change abruptly because of some accident or road closure at a totally different part of the city that you don't observe or know about. Or generally also in applications where you have other agents interacting, such as smart grid management and so on. One agent's behavior that is different than what it used to be can result in this kind of non-stationarity or environmental changes. So we want to build RL agents that can adapt to such changes. It turns out that for a lot of tasks that we do in our day-to-day life, humans are actually good at adapting to what is called local environment changes. So local changes are changes in the environment that happens in a small part of the environment. But even though the change might be only in a small part of the environment, it could be such that it results in you having to change your behavior in a larger part of the state space. So imagine you're driving from your home to work. This is actually a map of Halifax, where I live, and you have found out a good route that you take. That's the shortest route for you. And then on your usual route, you notice a road closure. Typically, what you do is you'll quickly plan an alternate route and then be able to take an alternate route immediately and come to work. So in cognitive science, this ability of humans to adapt to such local change is often associated with model-based behavior in humans. So the reason we were able to do this adaptation was that we had a map of the road network between our house and work. And when we observe this local change, we can quickly update this road network, which we already had in our head. And using this updated model of the road network between our home and work, we are able to find an alternate route to come to work. Or maybe nowadays we just ask Google Maps or similar methods. But we are able to do such adaptation to local changes. So there's a class of methods within reinforcement learning called model-based reinforcement learning methods, which is similar to the intuition that I gave, which kind of holds the promise for also to build reinforcement learning agents, which can similarly adapt to these local changes in the environment very efficiently. So in model-based reinforcement learning methods, what you typically do is you use the agent's interaction with the environment to build a model of the environment. For example, a deep neural network, which can take as input the current state the agent is in, the action that the agent takes, and to be able to predict how the environment will evolve. That means what will be the next state and the reward that the agent gets. Once you have such a model of the environment, then you can use this model to plan, basically use this model to figure out what the policy should be, what the best way to behave should be, instead of acting in the real world. And typically this process happens in a continual fashion, that you plan, but then you also use the behavior that you got out of planning to go and interact with the world and make your model better and so on. So given that the model-based behavior that we observe in humans and animals is able to adapt to these local changes, we also wanted to first go about evaluating if the current deep model-based oral methods that we had at the time, if they were able to actually adapt to such local changes in the environment. For that, with the collaboration of cognitive scientists, we developed this setup called LoCA setup. It's called local change adaptation. It's a high-level framework that you can use then to instantiate this setup in any particular domain that you want. And the goal of this setup is to particularly evaluate if a model-based oral method is able to adapt to the local change in a particular way. So this setup has two phases. So in each phase, so the blue region that you see here, you can think of as the entire environment. And the environment has two terminal states. So terminal states are states into which if an agent enters, the episode ends. It's like the end of the game or things like that. So we're going to have two terminal states. So terminal state T1 has a reward of 4, and let's say terminal state T2 has a reward of 2. So what this means is that if you train a model-based oral method in this phase 1 in such an environment, what you would expect it to learn is to learn a policy, a behavior that wherever the agent starts in this environment, it will go towards terminal state 1 because T1 has the higher reward. Right? So then we take that agent and move that agent to phase 2. In phase 2, we make one change in the environment. What we do is that for the terminal state 1, instead of that having a reward of 4, we change it to a reward of 1. So that is the only change we do. So this is the local change that happens in the environment. And the blue region shows the part of the state space that the agent interacts with. So in phase two, the agent will observe that local change that happened. So if you have an ideal model-based behavior, so in phase one, you should already have a good model of how the environment works, in particular the reward model. And then when it goes to phase two, it observes the only change that happens, which is that this terminal state T1 has changed reward from 4 to 1. So it should be able to update its model. And the behavior that you would expect then is for the agent, anywhere you start in the environment, it should go towards now terminal 2, because terminal 2 has the higher reward compared to terminal 1. So we're going to evaluate whether model-based solver methods in such a setup, if they are in fact able to go to terminal 2 in phase 2. So let me pause here quickly and see if there are any questions on the low-cost setup. This is just a high-level setup. I'll show you an instantiation. So there's a question on the chat. Even model-free does adapt, right? Yeah. So you can also build model-free methods that can adapt. So here we want to focus on model-based RL methods and see if they can adapt, because they have this feature by that they can actually exploit the fact that they have a model and potentially adapt more efficiently than model-free methods. That's the hope, but I'll show you what we observe next. Good. Any questions on this low-cost setup? Okay, so what we observed is that the then popular model-based RL methods such as Planet Dreamer and Dynastic Elastic Idea and MuZero and so on, they were actually not able to adapt to even simple reward changes in the environment. I'll give just a plot on a concrete setting. So for example, one of the experiments we had is on a simple task called Reacher. It's a slightly modified version. So Reacher that you see at the bottom left, it's a continuous control task. You have two rods that are joined together, and I think the actions are the angular. You can control those two rods, and the goal is to move the tip of these rods to one of these terminal states. And if you move to the state T1, the tip of this rod, by controlling the two rods, then you get a reward of 4. If you move it to T2, you get a reward of 2 in phase 1. So the right side, what you see is the evaluation of the then popular model-based RL method called Dreamer V2. In phase 1, as you would expect, it quickly learns to actually go to terminal 1. So if you consistently go to terminal 1 in this task, you'll get a reward of around 4,000, the sum of rewards. But in phase 2, when we change the reward of T1 from 4 to 1, an ideal model-based RL method should actually go to terminal 2 and get a return around 2,000. But what we observe is that Dreamer V2, for example, still keeps going to terminal 1 and gets a return of 1,000. So this was actually a surprising result for a lot of us, that these powerful deep RL model-based RL methods were actually not able to adapt, solve this low-cost setup. Solving low-cost setup means essentially being able to get reward close to going to terminal 2 in phase 2. So to understand why this happens, we have to understand a little bit more about how current deep model-based RL methods work. And we actually identified a bunch of failure modes which can happen, and we addressed some of them. But one failure mode that was a bit tawny was this problem of forgetting an interference that was happening. So I'm just going to focus on that. So typically, deep model-based RL methods such as Dreamer, the way at a high level they are trained is that as the agent interacts with this environment, we take these experiences and then store them in a replay buffer. Typically, what is used is the first in, first out replay buffer. I'll say what that means in a little bit. And then we take the most recent experience that the agent has had in its environment and use that to train an environment model. A deep neural network, for example, that given the state in action can predict what the next status and reward. So the way a FIFO replay buffer works is that when you get the latest experience from the environment, you add the latest experience to the replay buffer, and you remove the oldest experience from the replay buffer. So essentially, a FIFO replay buffer has the most recent, say 2 million or 5 million experience that you see from the environment, and use that to randomly sample experiences to train your deep neural network model. So this helps in several ways. It stabilizes the training of deep neural network without having correlated samples in training. It also helps you not uh, forgets the old experiences that you did not visit recently. Then you can use that trained model to do planning and repeat this process and so on. So the problem that was happening is the following. So what you're seeing here shown us is the optimal reward function. So if you use a deep neural network to learn this reward model, the optimal reward model that it should learn is in phase one, it gives reward of 0 everywhere except in terminal 2, where it gives a reward of, it should learn that the agent will get a reward of 2, and in terminal 2, terminal 1, it gets a reward of 4. In phase 2, the only difference should be that it should learn that, oh, now terminal 1's reward is 1 instead of 2. That is what an optimal reward model should look like. So typically, when we train this deep model-based solve methods, we use a large FIFO replay buffer. The problem with the large replay buffer is that it now still has samples from the old stale data before the change happened, right? So because you have a large buffer, you have some new samples after the change happened, but you also have some old incorrect experiences before the change happened, because of which what happens is that phase one, it's fine, it learns properly. In phase two, when the change has happened, when you train your reward model, you have experiences of both reward 1 and 4 in your replay buffer. So this is a visualization of a reward model that Dreamer V2 learns. In phase two, it ends up learning a reward model which has a reward of around 2.5 because it has some samples of reward ones, some samples of reward 4. So it kind of learns a model which predicts something in between those two. So the immediate suggestion that you might have is, well, large buffers are a problem. Okay, why don't we just then use a small buffer? So when you use a small buffer, you run into this problem of forgetting, particularly in the case of our low-cost setup, right? So in phase two, the agent only observes the local change, right? That is enough information to actually update your model. But when you have a small buffer, what happens is that it does, if you look at phase two, the reward model that Dreamer learns, it's actually good for terminal one, where it's getting its current experience from, but it ends up catastrophically forgetting the reward model for other parts of the state space. So this is the problem of interference and forgetting. So if you have a large buffer, you have old stale samples. But if you have a small buffer, then you forget experiences that you have not visited recently. Any questions on whatever I said so far? Any questions on the problem with having a FIFO buffer and why it causes this interference or forgetting issue in learning world models? Any questions? So there's a question on the chat. It says, Parth, does the buffer size also impact the learning? You would have limited samples to learn with limited buffer size. Yes, correct. So we are mainly here talking about the buffer that's used for learning the model. Yeah, so if you have a small buffer size, then you are updating your model only from whatever limited experience is in that buffer. So the model will be accurate to only that experiences which are in the buffer, and it'll slowly start forgetting experiences that it might have seen in the past from some old version of the buffer, but now it might start getting dominated in terms of accuracy, only things that it is in the buffer currently, and it keeps seeing. Good question. Any other question? Forgetting could be time-based rather than size-based alone. I'm not sure fully. Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, which could be that, yeah, so what you forget will depend upon which state you're visiting currently versus which state you have visited in, in the past, but you have not visited recently. I'm guessing that's what you mean by time. Then that is true. Yes. Any other questions? Okay, so this is essentially kind of a short summary of the first two works, actually. So in the last work, we set out to see if we can actually address this problem, for which we developed a new type of replay buffer called local forgetting replay buffer, or LoFo buffer for short. So, so the way the LoFo buffer works is the following. First, I'll say the high-level idea, and then I'll provide a small illustration. So LoFo buffer, a local forgetting buffer, instead of taking into account only when an experience is observed by the agent, whether it's the most recent or whether it was in the past, that's essentially was what the FIFO buffer does. It just takes the most recent N experience and keeps it. So LoFo buffer, along with taking into consideration when a sample new experience arises, we also take into consideration which part of the state space this new experience comes from. So what we are going to do is that whenever a new experience arrives, we are going to look at the local neighborhood of that experience, and we're going to remove the oldest experience from just the local neighborhood of where the agent is getting an experience from. Okay, so I'll give an illustration so it might be more clear. So imagine this is a visualization of your entire replay buffer, and the different blue stars are showing the different experiences that you have in different parts of your environment. For simplicity, think of this just as a 2D environment, and the stars are showing where these different experiences in the replay buffer are coming from. So let's say the agent is in this particular room or in some place, and now it has a new experience that it gets there. So what we are going to do is, now because your buffer is now full, instead of throwing out the oldest sample anywhere in the replay buffer, you're going to figure out in the region closely around where the agent is getting experience, what is the oldest sample there. So we're going to look at the oldest sample in the local neighborhood of where the agent is currently getting its experience from, and throw that sample out. So because you're throwing the oldest samples, experiences from where you're currently getting experience, if you have old stale data in a place where you're now actually having new experiences, though that old stale data can now, there's a chance that it will easily get thrown away. And because you throw away old experiences only in regions where you're actually collecting new experiences, other parts of the state space that you have not visited recently, those experiences will still remain in your replay buffer. This avoids the problem of forgetting. So essentially, the high-level idea, what it's trying to do is trying to build a replay buffer that allows you to have good distribution of experiences from all relevant parts of your state space, and removing something only when you have now new experience in that space. Otherwise, you still keep information. This will allow you to learn model that is approximately accurate in all parts of your environment, not just where you are currently or in the recent time getting experiences from. So this is the idea of LoFo replay buffer. Any questions on the idea of LoFo replay buffer? So if you use a LoFo replay buffer, how do you measure the distance between samplers? Very good question. So in this instance, this is the high-level idea. The particular instantiation that we use to measure is we learn actually a separate function which gives you the distance between two samples. So imagine there's a neural network which is trained such a way that if there are if you give two samples as input or two states as input, and if those states occurred right next to each other in terms of when it happened, then you want this neural network to predict the distance to be less, or these representations, the dot product between the representations, you want them to be small. If these samples are far away from the state space, then you want the distance or the dot product between the neural representations that you learn from them to be larger. So we actually learn a separate neural network distance function using the initial experiences that it gets from the environment, and use that distance as a measure to figure out which samples are in the local neighborhood or not. So we actually learn that distance function with this idea that things that are happening in terms of time immediately should be closer in the distance space compared to things that are happening much further away. Very good question. Any other questions? You're welcome. Okay, so when you use a LoFo replay buffer, so in the far right, you see the visualization. So phase one is fine for all the methods, but in phase two, it is in fact able to learn a reward function that is very close to the optimal reward function for both terminal ones and terminal two by basically addressing the interference or the forgetting problem. So you can now take any model-based RL method, and then instead of using a FIFO replay buffer that you use for learning your model, if you can use the LoFo replay buffer, then in fact, with just that change and no other change, Planet Dreamer or Tina, these methods can solve the LOCA setup or adapt to such local reward changes. So essentially what this means is that instead of using Dreamer v2, if you just do Dreamer v2 plus the LoFo replay buffer instead of the FIFO replay buffer, it can in fact, the blue line shows the Dreamer with LoFo. In phase two, it can get close to 2000, which basically means that it learns to, by just looking at the local change, it actually learns to go to the other terminal. Okay, another question. So how do you ensure that the model has visited enough states of the environment? I mean, the whole environment. So in phase one, when it learns the task, right? So any RL task, when it's learning, you need some way to encourage exploration to make sure that it explores enough of the state space such that it is able to learn good behaviors and find the optimal policy. So we don't have to do anything special, right? So in phase one, when it actually figures out that T1 is better than T2, in order to do that, we need the standard exploration ideas and so on for it to be able to visit all parts of the state space that are relevant and learn a policy that goes to 4. That we don't have to do anything special. So what we are doing is, once it learns to go to 4, what it's going to do is just wherever it starts, it will just focus on that. And if you naively do that, and in phase 2, when you're looking at, like, say, only one particular region where your current policy is taking to you or something, then if you naively do that, you might forget how the world worked in other parts, which you had actually visited in the past, but you're now forgetting because you no longer are visiting those parts of the state space, right? But then when you use the LoFo buffer, we make sure that even if you no longer visit those regions in following your optimal policy for the current task that you have, you make sure that you still remember other parts of the state space. This is important only when the task changes. If there is only one task and nothing changes, then you have figured out the best thing to do. Then you can just do that and forget everything else. But when there are changes in the environment, and if those changes are such that now you have to change your behavior and utilize and go to other parts of the environment which you have not been, just like how we saw in the driving example, then it's important that you remember other parts of the state space also that you had seen in the past. Okay, there's another question. So in the learning curve, why does streamer V2 plus LoFo drop to 1,000 at 1 million steps, then rise to 2,000? So when you go from, so the question is, why is this drop happening? So when you go from phase 1 to phase 2 and you observe this change, the model still needs some time to update its reward models such that this terminal's reward now becomes 1. So it needs some time before which it figures out that, oh, actually, instead of going to terminal 1, going to terminal 2 is better. So it still needs some time to learn that and switch to the correct one. Good question. Any other questions?
Don't you think it will be taking actions that would lead to terminal one in phase two as well, as you've learned the model?
Yeah, so at this point, if you see the cursor, the reward model is telling that, oh, terminal 1 is good, so it's going to terminal 1, right? And when you switch here at that time, and immediately the reward model will still be telling terminal 1 is good, right? Now, but it's slowly starting to experience that terminal 1, the reward should be 1. And it will quickly update its replay buffer first, that it's not going to update it in one sample. Maybe it's because things can also be stochastic and so on, right? So it needs some time to, what will happen in the LoFo buffer is that it will slowly start throwing out, as it observes examples in this region, it will start throwing out old experiences in this region. So it will slowly start throwing out rewards of 4 in that region and keep filling this region with more and more 1, in which case then it will start at some point, your reward model will start predicting consistently that this reward is 1. And then through its planning, it can start going to the other terminal. Did that answer your question, Rahul?
Yeah, but I mean, it's quite possible that it might be stuck in that local optima, right? I mean, if your state space is pretty large, what is the incentive for your agent to move towards terminal one? I mean, terminal two.
What is the incentive for your agent to move to
Like,
terminal?
is it just a sparse reward setting? Is it like you would get reward of 1 if you reach T1 and reward of 2 if you reach T2? If you don't have intermediate reward functions, it'll be hard for the agent to sort of explore and reach terminal 2. That's what my question is.
Yeah, so this is actually one of the biggest advantages of model-based RL methods, that this planning of how to go to terminal 2, this switching, it can all happen in the planning phase, that is learning just from the model. So as long as you can update your model of the environment to have these rewards of 2 and 1, and then you can use the model to generate simulated experience. So you'll ask, so say you have an updated model, right? The updated model already would, if you have a correct model, it would say that this is 2 and this is 1. And then when you start your model, maybe your policy will say going to 1, right? But that's not going to be good good for it, right? So you still need exploration and so on when it learns in the simulation for it to experience 2 and then experience 1 and so on. But it already knows that the value for some other action, say for here, turning this side is, say, I'm just making it up. Let's say the value is 500. Earlier, it thought going this way value was 1,500 or something. But now that it actually goes, it realizes that, oh, it's no longer 1500, it's actually reducing. At some point, it's going to realize that this value is actually less than going on the left, and it'll start going to the left. And once you have the correct model, all this can happen in just in the planning, meaning using simulated experience. You don't have to act in the real world. The real world experience you need is mainly to get your model correct.
Yes, but to get your model correct, you need to generate experience
Yeah,
in
correct.
your
So
environment, right?
yeah, correct. So the way this setup, so at a higher level, there are three kind of challenges to adapting to changes. So one is you have to first of all find the change, right, to see if the change happens. And the second is once you know that there is a change, you should be able to effectively update your model based on the change. And the third is once you have the updated model, you should be able to use it effectively to actually change your behavior or policy. So what the low-cost setup studies is only the second one. So the first one on how to effectively find the change, that is not a problem that the low-cost setup has, because in phase two, we are actually starting the agent here and forcing it to experience the change. So we remove the problem of you having to actually go and find where the change happens. This blue region in the local setup shows where the agent is given experience in phase two. So we remove the first problem. Maybe that is what you are hinting at, that whenever some change happens, you actually need the agent to have enough exploration or some mechanism to actually go figure out that there is in fact a change. So that problem is not studied in the local setup. That is an important problem indeed. What the local setup studies is, given that somehow you experience the change, can you actually update your model such that that change is reflected properly? That is what it's studying. Also, the third challenge, which I said, once you have an updated model, you need to be able to quickly plan, meaning find a policy that now optimizes the new model. That is also, these are simple environments that the current planning methods that Dreamer uses are enough to actually find. But if you have, yeah, maybe that's what you're also hinting at, the third phase, where if you have a very large environment, very complicated, you need more sophisticated methods for planning that would actually allow you to, even if you have an updated model, it might take a lot of time, even if it's simulation, to figure out um, that you have to change your policy in a lot of places to find a new optimal policy. So those all these three are challenges, but this focuses actually deliberately tries to avoid the first and thirds so that it can systematically just study the second challenge.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Good questions. Any other question? Anyone? Okay, so some of the current research that we are doing, one is on making LoFo actually more compute efficient. The current instantiation of LoFo is much more computationally heavy than a FIFO buffer, for example. And this additional computational cost comes from exactly the question that Alison had asked earlier, that how do you calculate this distance, right? So whenever a new experience comes, what we do currently is you take that experience, get an embedding of that experience in your distance function, and actually calculate the distance of that experience from all the experiences that you have in your replay buffer. And if your replay buffer is large, then this computation to find the local neighborhood can be computationally expensive. So we are working on a more efficient way of trying to approximately find this neighboring samples without having to do any kind of explicit local neighbor search. The second is, though we tested and we developed this for actually learning models in model-based RL method, this could potentially have benefits, potentially trade-offs in other class of RL methods outside of model-based, where we use replay buffer as well. So, for example, model-free of policy RL methods. And this is also something we are interested in and trying to evaluate if LoFo buffers have any potential benefits in model-free off-policy RL methods as well. Okay, this is the first section. Maybe I'll pause here for a few seconds to see if there are any other questions on this part of the talk. Okay. The second part of the talk is on discovering practice rewards. So this is mainly based on the second work in this slide, but the first work provides the foundation for this. So this is an important reference as well for those who are interested. So there are a lot of tasks in the real world where there could be periods of breaks in between actually performing the task, which we are calling as practice periods. And when I use the word practice, one example that many of you might have in your mind is any kind of sports and games, right? So imagine you're learning to play basketball, right? So on the left side, you see a video of me and my team in red playing in a basketball match. So I guess we're not that good. So during a match, you have evaluation, meaning that's the task that you care about, right? And then you get typically that's when you're doing the task that you care about, you have extrinsic rewards, or also these are called as the task specifying rewards. They tell what the task is, and in this case, it's maybe winning the game will give you a reward of +1. Maybe losing the game will give you a reward of -1. Maybe a draw is 0, for example. But in between matches, we often have to practice, right? So on the right side, you see a video of practice. So some of the characteristics that you can immediately see is different from the practice setup and the match setup is that during practice, you don't have any external evaluations. There are no extrinsic rewards telling me exactly what the task is. And the environment is also very different from the match, right? So I'm alone. You might have another player. So the kind of skills that you can practice is going to depend upon the environment that you have. And it's also a tricky question on what exactly should I be practicing. So the optimal thing for me to practice will depend upon my current skills that I have, and it will also depend upon the skills that I need most immediately to improve on my future immediate matches, say in the league. So we call this setup practice match setup, just drawing inspirations from sports and games. So such practice match setups are any task with breaks in between. Other examples outside of sports and games, you can think of as an office assistant robot using its evening after office hours for the daytime tasks it has. Or you can also think of simulation as the practice environment, which could be quite different from the real world. And the real world has actual tasks that you care about and so on. So the one important question that arises in these settings is that, well, what should an agent practice, right? So there are no extrinsic rewards, so you cannot just naively use the current RL methods, which depend on the extrinsic rewards or task specifying rewards to give what the goals are. And this was one of the contributions of this paper to kind of introduce this interesting setting. And we also provide one solution method. There could be others. And the solution method that we explore is that since the rewards are the ones that provide goals to the agent, can we actually discover what the reward should be during the practice periods? So we convert this question of what an agent should practice into one of discovering good rewards for the practice time. So we call them intrinsic practice rewards. So I'll first tell at a high level how we want to learn these practice rewards. So during the match period or when you have the actual task, so here the things are very, very discrete. So it makes the initial research easier, but you could imagine any kind of tasks in our day-to-day life. There'll be breaks where we practice, and this can happen at different granularity over different time and so on. So during the match time, or like the actual task, you have access to the extrinsic task specifying rewards. You can use that to update your behavior, the policy, or value function, whatever you have as part of your agent. And during the practice time, we don't have extrinsic rewards. So instead, in our setup, we have a deep neural network which takes as input the current state the agent is in, the action it wants to take, and it's going to predict an intrinsic practice reward that the agent will use to update its policy. Okay, and then whenever it's in the match, it uses the match rewards. Whenever it's in the practice, it uses the practice reward from this neural network. So the key question is, how do you learn the parameters of this practice reward, right? What should these practice rewards be? If you think of it, the way we want to learn this practice rewards is such that by using this practice reward, if I update my policy and behavior, the policy that I end up having after practicing using my current practice reward actually works well in the future matches that I have, right? So it has to, ultimately, what I care about is improving and performing well on future matches. So what we want is to figure out how I should change the parameters of my practice reward such that my future performance and future matches actually improves. And that is in fact what we do. So to give slightly bit more detail, you can imagine during the practice period, there could be multiple updates that happens to your policy or any parameters that you have as part of the agent using the practice reward. And then when you go to a match after that, you're going to take your updated policy that you have learned after practicing and utilize it in the future match. And we want to calculate the gradients of the future match performance with respect to the parameters of the practice reward. The way it would happen is that we have to calculate the gradient through the update process that actually happened during your practice period. And this kind of results in a bi-level optimization. It's called meta learning, in particular technique called meta gradients for those who are familiar. But essentially the idea is it calculates the gradient through the update process of whatever it happened during the practice, thereby allowing us to learn how to change our practice rewards such that the resulting policy or the resulting updated agent that you get by practicing is actually performing well in future matches. So this was the idea that we explored, and here is an example result. We have a few more discussion and results in the paper. So this is a practice match version of Pong. During match, Pong is like a simple 2D version of tennis. And during match, the agent plays against an opponent. But imagine during practice, here it just has a wall against which it can hit the ball, and there is no rewards or anything. So you have to figure that out. The blue curve on the right shows the performance of an agent that learns only during matches. And the red curve shows the performance of an agent, which in addition to learning during matches, it also learns during this practice periods in between using the discovered practice rewards. So it essentially learns to give practice rewards for actually returning the ball against the wall and so on. And it can significantly speed up the learning by utilizing the practice period as well effectively. The black and green curves are some other simple ways of using the practice period. So one important point to note here is that, as I said, the practice rewards are actually non-stationary. What this means is that the optimal practice rewards are non-stationary. What this means is that the best practice reward that you can give to the agent actually changes over time, because the best thing that you can do, as you can imagine, will depend upon your current capabilities and what you can do to maximally improve as soon as possible. So there's also a type of natural curriculum that can emerge in learning practice rewards this way. And whenever we learn these kind of meta learning, or like this practice rewards or any kind of intrinsic reward, what is also important is that whatever we are doing as giving us sub goals and all this stuff, we want to make sure it's actually aligned with what we what we really care about. What we really care about is the performance and feature matches, right? So this type of optimization allows us to encode that we actually care about the match rewards, and that is automatically taken care of in the way we optimize it. So some of the current research directions that we are working on top of this is one is on improving some of the optimization challenges in learning these practice or intrinsic rewards properly. And the second is we hypothesize that there are some complementary benefits to the task dependent practice rewards or intrinsic rewards that we are learning with the type of task independent intrinsic rewards that are typically hand designed and used in a lot of actually reinforcement learning tasks, which are mainly they come from ideas in developmental psychology from human and animal learning. For example, there are a lot of intrinsic rewards that people have developed based on ideas of curiosity, novelty seeking, or recently ideas such as empowerment, being able to predictably or like controllably affect your environment and so on. So these kind of task independent intrinsic rewards, we think could have complementary benefits to what we are trying to, that we are discovering in our methods, which are task dependent intrinsic rewards, and we are exploring that synergy currently as well. Okay, let me pause here and see if there are any questions on this. Any questions? It's all crystal clear. Okay, thanks. Okay. Um, so I have a few closing remarks. So those were the main two ideas that I wanted to talk about that I'm most excited about now, and we are currently working on as follow-up works as well. So I just wanted to note that we are a new research group at the Dalhousie. So I started recently, and our focus is on deep reinforcement learning. We have two wonderful current members, Ru and Dilip, who joined our group last fall. So we also have two new students who will be joining this fall. And our main focus is on deep RL, but particularly currently we're focusing on improving data efficiency of RL methods, including model-based RL, discovering what to learn based on intrinsic rewards and so on, but also other methods such as GDFs and transfer learning and transferring knowledge from external sources such as language models and so on as well. So I'm also interested in application-driven research, obviously in collaboration with domain experts in those areas. Some of the things that I've been involved in currently or in the past, including in healthcare, gameplay, computer networks, robotics, and so on. So I'd also like to use this opportunity for any academic members or industrial members who are interested in collaboration. Also students, we have openings for PhD and master positions in our group for those interested. Okay, that's it from my side. Thanks again for having me here, and I'm happy to take any questions on any part of the talk or even general questions. Thanks.
Mm. Thank you very much for the talk. It's really interesting. Uh, I would like to know more about your second line of work. It was more, I mean, abstract, but then I would like to definitely take a look at your paper and then I'll get back to you.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential in basically the idea is basically discovering what to learn. And I talked about intrinsic rewards. So I was also involved. I was involved in some other work as well that I'm excited about. You can check in my website. It's so the intrinsic reward is about discovering what goals should be, right? But then a big part of learning in deep RL is also learning good representations. And one way we do that is through auxiliary tasks, right? You predict something about the future and so on, but then you can also discover what aspects of the future should you actually be predicting things about. So this is about discovering what the auxiliary task should be. Or you can basically, if you're a driving agent, you want to figure out, maybe you want to predict like, oh, if I turn right and do this and so on, what will happen? Or will this person cross the road if I do this and so on? These might be all useful predictions that you want to make, but how do you discover what those should be? That's also an important direction that we are studying.
Right.
Any other questions? Sorry, Rahul, did you have a question? Sorry.
No, I was just curious about the intrinsic reward. Intrinsic reward, generally, I heard that people use it in a sparse reward setting to promote exploration. But I think you were using it for, to solve some other problem.
Yeah. So I think the definition of what intrinsic rewards are slightly different in different fields as well. So sorry for the confusion. So the our working definition is any reward signal that is other than the task specifying extrinsic rewards or intrinsic rewards. Okay, so that is one definition. Okay, so that's there. There are two broad classes of. Can we stop sharing? So there are two broad classes of intrinsic reward, if you want to think about it. One is task dependent and other is task independent. And often both of them are hand designed. So a lot of the task independent hand designed intrinsic rewards have been towards exploration, like exactly what you said, which is they're not exploiting any task knowledge. There's general notions that, oh, being curious is good. You have to visit states that you have not visited recently. You have to try and figure out how to manipulate environment in a repeatable fashion. And a lot of these ideas generally come from how humans and animals learn, and those are hand-designed, task-independent intrinsic rewards, which are very helpful. But there are also task-dependent intrinsic reward, which often come from domain knowledge, right? If there may be a domain expert who has some information that, oh, for this task, these are some probably good sub-goals which are easier that you have to learn first. And maybe I can give you some rewards so that learning becomes easier and so on. So one problem is hand designing task-dependent intrinsic rewards. First of all, you need domain knowledge. It could be time consuming and so on. But also often it could lead to some kind of suboptimal solution because you're trying to manipulate it in ways which you may not exactly know the consequences. And also, as I said, the best intrinsic reward keep changing over time. So you have to also modify your intrinsic reward and so on. So what our work tries to do is kind of focuses on the task dependent intrinsic rewards. But instead of hand designing them, we are asking, can you actually learn them on your own? So the kind of intrinsic reward this will learn is some kind of sub goals or providing intrinsic rewards for finishing some part of the task as well, so that the overall maximization of the extrinsic reward becomes easier for the particular algorithm that we use. And this also automatically takes into consideration of any kind of limitations that your agent might have. These limitations might be in terms of the memory you have, the computational resources that you have, or how much planning you can do. All those, this optimization already takes into account in terms of what's the best thing this agent can do and can automatically adapt over time. I hope that gives some clarity on the space of intrinsic rewards.
Yeah, so also like whatever problems you talked about are all continual learning settings, right?
They are related, meaning, yeah, so the first setup that I talked about is, I would say, the simplest version of continual learning setup, in the sense that I was talking about one change, and that's what we evaluated, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can imagine having a long life with these changes arbitrarily happening at different times. So these methods are going to be useful in settings when you move to the challenging continual learning setting. The second thing also are ideas that are going to be useful in the continual learning setting, but then the actual experiments that we did, we gave them resets, and there are different levels of continual, like different benchmarks or setups people study. What we had, I had resets, like the environment was reset and it was a normal episodic order task, but then after a certain number of episodes, now you have some episodes where you can practice. You are not being evaluated. There are no rewards. How do you learn that? So I think these ideas are going to be useful in the continual learning setting, but the true continual learning setting is much more challenging than the setup that we studied, I would say.
Oh yeah, so we just have two MDPs over here, practice MDP and real MDP, right?
Correct.
You've been uh, training, I mean, practicing in the practice MDP, and then probably you wanna test it on your real MDP. Probably you wanna adapt to your real MDP.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Okay. If you don't have any questions, we can thank the speaker. Um, and then I think he'll be happy to take questions offline. I mean, if you guys have any questions, you can drop him an email. He'd be happy to answer, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, uh, yeah. So thanks, Professor Rajendran, for joining us, for sharing your expertise with our community. It was great.
Thank you, and thanks again for having me. And it was nice meeting all of you. Yeah, if you have any further questions, feel free to email me. You can find my email on my website. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you guys later. Bye bye.
Bye.